Hello, and welcome to Two Pews in a Pod. Join us as we explore faith in a modern world at Evangelical Lutheran Church in Frederick, Maryland. Now, here is your host, Pastor Paul Baglios.
I'm Paul Baglios, and happy to welcome all of you who are listening, perhaps also watching, this episode of Two Pews in a Pod, the podcast of Evangelical Lutheran Church here in Frederick. And today we are at the second of three planned episodes in our podcast series dealing with surviving and moving in life after the death of a spouse. And once again, I am pleased to welcome to this episode two members of the congregation who recorded the previous episode.
I'm Dee Dee Bowman.
I'm Sandy Brown.
And we are joined today also by Jimmy Capino, known to many of you as a member of the congregation, the leader of our praise team here. And many of you who are part of ELC will also know that Jimmy's wife, Elizabeth, died in 2015. And he has agreed to be part of the conversation for this episode and the one that follows. Jimmy, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Dee Dee.
Thank you for inviting us.
You're very welcome. In this episode, one of the things we want to talk about is how the death of your spouse and your life without that partner affected your other relationships in your life.
Well, let me say that in the last episode, I mentioned that 2 months before John died, my sister moved in with us because she was asked to leave her rental home. So essentially, she moved in, and then 2 weeks later, John died. So my relationship with my sister has become even more intense because though she lived across the street, it isn't like having someone live in the home with you.
Yeah.
So that also helps. I'm not alone, which makes a big difference.
I think for me, the relationships are more intentional. I'm thinking about my adult children, my grandchildren, as well as friends and family that is not necessarily by blood, that they have been more intentional about reaching out to me. And I too have been more intentional about maybe modeling where I am being vulnerable in terms of that process of grief with them.
I'm glad you said that. The way you said that, it's interesting. When Elizabeth passed away, I was her caregiver, and so I was very close to her family, and I still am close to one of her aunts that lives in New Mexico. Matter of fact, I just went out to visit her earlier this year. Elizabeth has a daughter, Katie, as my stepdaughter. So I'm very deliberate about I have two daughters of my own. Every day, I text them and tell them all three that I love them. And I think it's like when I don't want to be in a situation where did I tell them I love them recently? And so it's every morning, first thing I do. So it is a very deliberate action.
Yeah, similar to the intentionality that Dee Dee just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did any relationships in your lives become more difficult after the death of your spouse?
I don't think more difficult in my situation. I too had been Mark's caregiver. He did not need intensive care, but I was available to be his caregiver. So that in a sense, some of those relationships that we had as a couple had kind of already started to change just because of his mobility, his ability to do things that we maybe once did together had changed. So I don't know that his death diminished those relationships in that sense. Clearly they did. Clearly they were different.
Yeah.
We had relationships as a couple, and we were no longer that. But again, prior to his death, some of those relationships had already started to change a little bit.
Something I noticed that I didn't feel was, now that I was single again, no relationships with my coupled friends ever made me feel like, oh, she's a threat now, watch out for this. And, you know, but I know people who have experienced that. And so my friends I've never felt different. I have never felt their feeling to me being any different. They just include me like they always did. And so in one group that I have, my sister sort of stepped in as that other
Your plus
person.
one.
Yeah.
But I've never felt as though I was a threat to any of my friends' relationships. So that's really comforting.
Yeah, indeed.
I actually, after Elizabeth passed away, her mother was very sick, and so I spent a lot of time caring for her, taking her to the hospital and doctor's appointments and things like that. And she eventually passed as well. As far as couples relationships, maintain some of those just on a different level, because I'm a third wheel,
Yeah.
in a lot of that stuff. And so, I don't, Sherry and Dave Beach, for instance, we were very close with them, and they were on the praise team and all that. After Elizabeth passed, I keep in touch with them, but, we don't go do things again.
Well, and that's what I was wondering about when I thought of this question to be included in the conversations for this series, that I know that when you are part of a couple, many of your, especially social relationships that may not be connected by family ties, you relate to other people as a couple. Mm-hmm. And there are often dynamics for the way other people relate to you as a couple. And when that changes, sometimes those relationships find a reset, and sometimes they don't.
One thing I feel is that my friends reach out to me more. I always felt included, but I hear a lot more, how are you doing today? Or what's going on with you? Mm-hmm. Where, although we were close, I didn't get that frequent connection, mm-hmm. which is very nice.
Just checking in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's good to hear that there are people in your life who are aware, while your sister now lives with you, they are aware that you are single, solo, in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
See, Elizabeth and I, we were both professional artists, right? And she was a writer, and I'm a musician. And so we didn't have a lot of that kind of relationship. And so when she passed away, then I was kind of like on my own, and I had cut back a lot of playing music. I was playing, at one point, I played music every night of the week. And, we had a place in West Virginia that, that was our go-to. Couldn't go there because she was working during the week. I was working weekends. She was off on weekends. So just getting our schedule. So when all of that ended, I don't have a lot of that friends calling me. That doesn't happen in my place.
Do you miss it?
Pardon me?
Do you miss that?
Miss her, yeah.
Oh, well, no, I meant the connection from your friends. Or are you busy?
I have lots of associates. Thousands of associates.
Right.
So it's not like I'm alone, but just close friends. My friend Dave, he and I played together for 25 years. I saw him last year, and when I see him, it's like, the conversation picks up on the word where we left off. It's just one of those kind of things.
How long were you married?
I was married to Elizabeth for 12 years.
Wow.
But I've been married most of my life, so.
That's the topic for a different series in this podcast. We're planning about 19 episodes on the story of Jimmy Capino, so you'll have to watch for that in the future. Actually, some of what you were saying touches upon another question that I wanted to raise with the three of you, which is how the death of your spouse has impacted or affected your familiar routines and activities. And I'll say that there's a personal experience for me behind that question. This has become true for my wife, Sharon, and I for the past several years, that almost every day of the week, there is a particular hour time, and it's in the evening. And I'll say, I'm looking across the room at Marie because I always say that her spouse, Daniel, our director of music ministries, interrupts this because choir rehearsal for Evangelical Lutheran Church is Thursday evening. So our time is usually disrupted or at least delayed on Thursday. But what happens is simply that we are together in the kitchen almost always. We might have a happy hour beverage while we are conversing with each other, while we're preparing the meal that we'll enjoy together, talking about all manner of other things. And I know that for both of us, through the entire course of our day, we look forward to that time. And it's difficult for me, it's painful for me to anticipate what would my day be like without that. I know that you had said in the previous episode, Sandy, that your hardest time is at night.
Yes.
And I think this is true for many of us. I would anticipate that those special Sharon and Paul times in the day, or whatever period of time it would be the hardest. And I'm wondering how you've experienced that, the change in activity and rhythm and routine.
I think for me, that's certainly been a learning curve. I retired about a year before Mark died, specifically because I needed to be flexible to address his needs. So that once I retired kind of became my new routine. And so I feel like in a sense, the last year and a half since Mark's death, I've learned how to be retired as well.
Oh.
So it's certainly a learning curve. I certainly appreciate the value of routine for me. I like my routine, whatever that may be. But it has been an interesting journey. And I'm still learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have to laugh because before John and I married, my older son said to me, "Do you know that John knows how busy you are and what you do and how much time you're not home? Is he going to go along with this?" So he did. He was very kind and once in a while would say, "Are you going out again?" But I am busy. I'm involved in a lot of things, and that really hasn't diminished much. So that's been very helpful to me to keep me going. I'm always afraid if I sit down, I won't get up again. So I keep moving. And those groups that I belong to, I still belong to. And they are very helpful to me. So I do enjoy it.
For me, I was, before Elizabeth got sick, I was in a traveling blues band, and I was playing 6-7 nights a week, with rehearsals and things like that. And so that was my routine, and we would meet each other at the house most days.
That's in the hallway.
And that when she became ill, then I she's more important than playing the blues. So I started backing out of the music all the time to a point where I wasn't playing, but maybe once or twice a month. And and then I was still doing the once a week here at the church. And when she passed, all of a sudden it was like now what do I do?
Yeah.
Because I don't have the connections in the music world that I had, and some of my friends, if you. But so now I'm just in the process of trying to figure out what does life look like, and she's been gone for 9 years now, and I'm still trying to figure out what does life look like without her. I mean, I miss her dearly, but you got to move on in your life, and so I'm playing once in a while now, and but doing a little bit of traveling and stuff, and I kind of like that better than playing music.
Well, like Dee Dee said, a learning curve, and you're still learning.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about travel, listening to you, this question just occurred to me, so I'll ask it. What has become part of your life that wasn't previously because of the death of your spouse?
Well, my sister isn't as mobile and active as she was, so now I'm sort of a bit of a caregiver for her. So I have to be more conscious of when I go and where I go and how long I stay. But basically, that's about the change.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you have a story of a relocation, and you talked about that a little bit last time.
And we were, when you came to the house after Mark had died, you had to climb over the boxes to get in, because we were literally, I went to settlement on our new home, my new home, in between when Mark died and when we had his memorial service. We were kind of that far along in that process. So that was a plus and a minus. I think certainly more of a plus. I had many people after the fact say, I can't believe you went ahead with the move. For me, it was a project, though, too.
Yeah, I had to.
And it was a good thing. I think you had mentioned
Yeah,
at one
I
point,
remember.
too, that not coming home to who wasn't there. And that has stuck with me because that is very true. I think it's also true for my children. When they come, they're not hit. We all feel it, but it's not slapping you.
Your home is not furnished with Mark's absence.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a wonderful way to
in the
say
way
that.
that the home you and Mark shared would be. And I know not everyone feels that way. Other people have different experiences entirely. But I remember saying that to you because thinking, if I were in your shoes, I think I would proceed with the move. And I say this, one of the people close to me in my life that I lost was my grandfather on my mother's side. They were in Pennsylvania. We were living in Chicago when he died. He had had heart attack and heart surgery and never fully recovered. Died in the hospital a few days after his surgery. And that was sad. I was very close to my grandfather. But I had not anticipated the way it hit me when I had traveled back to Pennsylvania for the funeral, and we were gathering in my grandparents' home, which then was still my grandmother's house, but it was the home that they had had together for many years. And approaching it and walking in, I can still feel it to this day. It was like a mule kick in the chest, that the enormity of his absence struck me. Because I had so associated his life, his presence with that place. And I remember that conversation, Dee Dee. And that's not to say everyone would feel the same way, but I know I would.
I am a firm believer that what I have experienced and what works for me may work for absolutely nobody else in the entire world.
Right, we talked about that last time. Everybody deals with grief. Everybody experiences grief in an absolutely unique way.
Right, well, because I'm where John was.
Yep.
It's interesting because I know he's gone, but when I walk into the room, I sort of look in the chair.
Yeah. Yeah, you talked about that. I love that. And you had enough years together in that home with John. And I can understand that too, that in that sense, you are still proximate to his presence.
Absolutely.
How is that for you? How is it to be for you in the home that had been also Elizabeth's?
Well, when Elizabeth passed, I thought to myself, all right, I'm just going to stay here, But the ghost was everywhere. And within a year, my mother passed. And so when she passed, now I've got 2 houses. And so I didn't want to go live in my mommy's house. So I had that completely remodeled and sold the house that I was living in I had been living in since 1966. And so it was quite a difference. I was just clearing the decks of all of the those, to me, they're ghosts, all those ghost thoughts. And so if you go into the house I live in now, it doesn't look anything quite like what it was when she lived there, when my mother lived there. And I've been living there for 7 years now.
In your mother's home?
Yeah.
Okay.
Remodel.
Yes.
Reimagine.
Now it's your home.
Yeah. My one granddaughter says, that was Nanel's house. Yeah, it was.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, for sharing what you've shared of your experiences and perceptions. Thank you, those of you who have listened to or also watched this episode. We will record yet a 3rd episode in this series. But for now, we'll say goodbye. I'm Paul Baglios.
I'm Dee Dee Bowman.
Sandy Brown.
Jimmy Capino.
This has been 2 Pews in a Pod, a podcast hosted by the pastor of Evangelical Lutheran Church in Frederick, Maryland. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.